Nobody puts a medal in a paper cup unless the world has taken everything else. Clayton Gravel, Boone heard himself say it. Before he knew he was speaking, his voice low enough to disappear beneath the morning noise outside Prairie Belle Diner. It was 10:35 on a bright Saturday in eastern Kansas, the kind of day when County Road 18 filled with pickup trucks, seed company banners, folding tables, and old men in ball caps arguing over soil like it was religion. Across the gravel lot, the Seed and Soil Fair was already awake, selling apple hand pies, sweet corn starts, raffle tickets, and coffee strong enough to make a tired farmer blink twice. Then the paper cup rolled into the sun. It came from the narrow space behind the diner, pushed by a dry prairie wind that smelled of hot dust, fryer oil, cut grass, and gasoline warming under chrome. The cup bounced once against the front tire of Clayton's Harley, spun in a lazy circle, and settled near his boot like it had been waiting for him. Clayton was 59, broad through the shoulders, gray in the beard, and quiet in the way old engines are quiet when they are running right. His black leather vest was worn soft at the edges. His knuckles carried scars from wrenches more than fights, and the brotherhood patch on his back made strangers look twice before deciding whether to smile. He was used to that. He bent down to pick up the cup because litter near a motorcycle bothered him, and because a man who had spent half his life on American highways learned to notice small things before they became big problems. The cup felt heavier than trash. Inside, wrapped in a napkin stained with coffee, lay an old military medal, dulled at the edges, the ribbon faded to tired colors, the metal scratched, as if it had been carried through years of pockets, drawers, and hard weather. No quarters, no nickels, no folded dollar bills, just the metal. Clayton held the cup still, and for a moment the whole fair seemed to move around him, without touching him. A boy calling out prices for tomatoes across the road, a diesel truck backing up near the feed store, the diner door chiming open and shut, the low tick of cooling motorcycle pipes behind him. He looked toward the back of Prairie Belle Diner. At first he saw only the brick wall, the grease barrels, and a stack of wooden pallets beside the service door. Then he saw the man sitting in the thin strip of shade, knees drawn close, army green coat pulled tight, over narrow shoulders, white hair flattened by sleep or exhaustion. The old man's head was tipped forward, but his right hand kept reaching toward his chest, patting the torn pocket of his coat again and again, like a man checking for a heartbeat that had gone missing. Clayton did not move fast. Fast movements frightened people who had already lost too much. Behind him, Royce Patch, Callahan shut off his bike, and Eldon Wrench Tate let his V-twin rumble down into silence. The smell of old leather and warm oil hung around them. Clayton kept his eyes on the man behind the diner and carried the paper cup with both hands, not like a found object, not like a piece of trash, but like something that still belonged to somebody. The old man looked up before Clayton reached him. His face was lined deep, sunburned along the nose, hollow beneath the cheekbones, but his eyes were clear enough to understand loss when it was standing in front of him. Clayton stopped 6 feet away, leaving space between them. "Sir," he said, holding out the cup, "I believe this is yours." The old man stared at the medal, and the trembling started in his hands before he lifted them. Not fear, not shame, something older, something heavier. He took the cup slowly, as if the metal inside weighed more than anything a man should have to carry before noon. Then, from the open diner door behind them, a woman's voice called sharply, "Is he bothering you, gentlemen?" Clayton did not turn around right away. He watched the old man close one hand over the cup and press it against his chest, where the torn pocket could no longer hold it. Only then did Clayton look back at the diner, at the busy tables, the patriotic bunting in the window, and the sign advertising free coffee for veterans until 12. The old man was sitting 30 feet from that sign. Nobody had seen him. Clayton turned slowly, the paper cup still held between the old man's hands like a small, fragile lantern. Marla Whitcomb stood in the open service doorway, with a dish towel over one shoulder and a line of worry across her forehead. Behind her, the kitchen clattered with breakfast plates, coffee cups, and the sharp bell cooks used when an order was ready. It was only 10:42 in the morning, but Prairie Belle Diner already felt as crowded as a county courtroom. Nobody is bothering anybody, Clayton said. His voice did not rise. That made the words heavier. Marla looked from Clayton to Royce, then to Eldon, then down at the old man seated beside the grease barrels. She was not cruel, not in the simple way people like to imagine cruelty. She was tired, short-staffed, and carrying a whole Saturday morning on her back, while the seed and soil fair poured strangers through her front door. She had seen Hal Mercer outside, before sunrise, sitting on the rear step, with his coat pulled tight, and she had told herself she would handle it gently after the rush. Then the rush never stopped. It never does. He was asked to move away from the door. Marla said, softer now, but still guarded. We have deliveries coming through here, and customers can see straight down the hallway when the kitchen door opens. Hal lowered his eyes, and that small movement told Clayton more than any speech could have. The man was not angry. He was practiced at being moved along. Clayton glanced toward the narrow hallway behind Marla. Through it, he could see red vinyl stools, blue paper streamers, a chalkboard special for biscuits and gravy, and a hand-painted sign in the front window promising free coffee for veterans until noon. The sign was bright. The meaning was not. Ma'am, Clayton said. Did he ask anyone for money? Marla's mouth opened, then stopped. A waitress carrying a tray paused behind her, listening without pretending not to. He had that cup, Marla said. People see a cup, they assume things. I have families in there. I have fair sponsors. I have the mayor's office coming by before lunch. Hal tightened his grip on the cup, and the metal clicked faintly against the paper wall. Eldon heard it. Royce heard it. Marla heard it too, but she did not yet understand what the sound meant. Clayton took one half-step aside, so she could see the metal, without him making a show of it. That cup is not for taking, he said. It is for holding. The words landed quietly, and the kitchen seemed to lose some of its noise. Marla looked at Hal again, truly looked this time, past the frayed collar, past the dusty boots, past the beard trimmed unevenly with a dull razor. She saw the way he kept the cup close to his chest, because the pocket on his coat had split open from seam to seam. She saw his fingers trembling around the metal ribbon. She saw embarrassment, not begging. Her face changed before her posture did. I thought, she began, then stopped because the rest of the sentence had no decent place to go. Hal cleared his throat. I was only waiting for the shuttle. His voice was dry, thin, and careful, as if every word cost him something. I got here early, so I would not miss it. Marla looked toward the community shuttle parked across the gravel lot, its white hood raised like a broken wing. Dennis Harper, the driver, stood beside it, with a phone pressed to his ear and one hand buried in his gray hair. The old vehicle had not moved an inch. A hot gust pushed dust across the lot and rattled the seed packets on a vendor table across County Road 18. Somewhere inside the diner, somebody laughed too loudly at something. That was not funny out here. Clayton looked at the shuttle, then back at Hal. Where are you trying to go, sir? Hal swallowed, and his thumb rubbed once across the rim of the cup. Green Hollow Cemetery, he said. Before noon, if I can. Marla closed her eyes for half a second. Not long enough to hide from it, just long enough to feel it. Then Clayton heard the low scrape of Eldon opening the tool roll on his bike, one wrench after another catching sunlight against black leather. Royce was already looking at the shuttle like a man measuring a problem by the shape of its shadow. Clayton nodded once. The decision had been made before anyone spoke it. The three motorcycles sat in a crooked line near the edge of the gravel lot, their engines cooling, with soft metallic ticks under the Kansas sun. They were not show bikes, not polished for weekend photographs, not built to impress strangers at a fair. Clayton's old Harley carried road dust along the fenders. Eldon's bike had a dent near the tank, where a socket had slipped years ago, and Royce's saddlebags were patched with black tape that had survived rain from Oklahoma to Montana. They looked rough. They ran honest. People inside the diner kept watching through the rear hallway and side windows, pretending to check the weather or the vendors across the road. A table of seed salesmen went quiet when Eldon unrolled his tools on the pavement. A mother pulled her coffee cup closer when Royce crossed the lot toward the shuttle, though he was only squinting at the loose belt under the raised hood. Clayton noticed all of it and reacted to none of it. A man could waste his whole life answering looks. He had work in front of him. Dennis Harper lowered his phone and gave the bikers the uncertain half-smile of someone grateful for help, but unsure whether he was allowed to accept it. He was a broad, tired man in a county transit shirt, with sweat darkening the collar and grease already on his fingers. "I called Mason's garage," Dennis said. "They have 2 tractors ahead of me, and a grain truck, with no brakes. Earliest they can get here is after 1. Hal's face shifted at that, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough that the light seemed to leave it. Clayton saw the old man look toward the road beyond the diner, as if Green Hollow Cemetery might appear if he stared hard enough. It would not. It was 9 miles away, past 2 wheat fields, a limestone church, and a low bridge where gravel gathered on the shoulder. Eldon leaned into the shuttle engine bay and touched the belt with 2 fingers. "Cracked clean through in 3 places," he said. "Battery posts are crusted too. Might turn over once. Might not turn over twice." Royce spat a sunflower seed shell into the dust and checked his watch. "Parts store on Sycamore is 1.7 miles. If they have the belt, I can be back in 12 minutes. Marla stood by the service door, arms folded tight, the dish towel still on her shoulder. The fair noise moved around her. Fiddles from the small stage, a child laughing near the kettle corn stand, a tractor horn honking once for attention. She looked at Hal, then at the free coffee sign in her own front window, and something in her face tightened with shame. She did not defend herself. "That mattered. I can get him something to eat," she said. Hal's head lifted quickly. "I do not have money for breakfast." Marla swallowed. "Kitchen made an extra plate for staff. Eggs, toast, sausage. It will go cold if nobody takes it." Clayton looked at her then, really looked, and gave the smallest nod. Not praise. Permission to make it right, without making it a performance. Eldon reached for a wrench. Royce was already fastening his helmet. The sun flashed across his visor, then across the old metal in Hal's paper cup, turning the dull metal bright for half a second. Hal saw it too. His fingers closed around the cup, but not as tightly now. The bikers had not raised their voices. They had not threatened anyone. They had simply seen a problem, measured it, and started taking it apart. Marla came back, with the plate wrapped in brown paper instead of sitting open on a diner tray. That small choice saved Hal from being watched while he ate. She carried it low at her side, the way someone might carry a private letter through a crowded room, and she set it on the wooden pallet beside him, without bending over him like a nurse or a judge. "Staff breakfast," she said. Too much came off the grill. Hal looked at the package, then at her hands, then at Clayton. Hunger moved across his face before pride could cover it. He opened the paper slowly, and the smell of eggs, sausage, buttered toast, and black pepper rose into the sunlit air behind Prairie Belle Diner. For a moment, nobody spoke. Eldon worked under the shuttle hood 30 yards away, metal clicking against metal, while Dennis held the loose battery cable clear and listened to instructions. Across County Road 18, a bluegrass fiddle started up near the seed tent, thin and bright, over the hum of fair traffic. Royce's motorcycle was already a dark shape heading toward Sycamore Street, kicking dust behind its rear tire. Clayton stayed near Hal, but not too near. He crouched beside a stack of milk crates, elbows resting on his knees, letting his shadow fall away from the old man. The metal sat in the paper cup between Hal's boots, the ribbon folded inside like something that had learned to hide. Clayton nodded toward it. "I served with men who kept things in strange places," he said. "Socks, glove boxes, coffee cans, Bible pages. Usually meant the thing mattered too much to lose." Hal chewed once, swallowed hard, and wiped his mouth with the corner of the brown paper. "Pocket tore last winter," he said. "Did not notice until my room key was gone." Clayton did not ask what room. A man sitting behind a diner at mid-morning, with his coat buttoned wrong, had already answered that. Hal picked up the metal and tried to straighten the ribbon, but his fingers shook so badly that the cloth slipped twice. Clayton saw Marla watching from the service door, her face quieter now. He saw 2 customers at the hallway window pull back when he glanced their way. He saw Hal pretending none of it hurt. That was the hardest part to watch. "May I?" Clayton asked. He held out one hand, palm up, still 6 inches from the metal. Hal studied him. The old eyes moved, from Clayton's gray beard to the oil under his nails, then to the faded brotherhood patch on his vest. Whatever he found there did not frighten him. He placed the medal in Clayton's hand. Clayton did not polish it on his shirt. He did not hold it up for others to see. He simply smoothed the ribbon flat with his thumb and found the bent pin on the back. The clasp had been forced open and twisted, probably from years of being shoved into pockets, drawers, and cups not made for holding a life. "Pin is bad," Clayton said, "but it can hold for today." Hal let out a breath that sounded almost like pain. "Today is all I need." The words were quiet. They changed the air. Clayton looked toward the shuttle, where Eldon was now cleaning the battery post with a wire brush. He looked at the road beyond the fair, bright and dusty, stretching toward Green Hollow. Then he fastened the medal to Hal's coat, just above the torn pocket, pressing the backing carefully so it would not bite the thin fabric. Hal looked down at it. His shoulders shifted, not straighter exactly, but less collapsed. Marla saw it too, and her hand rose to her mouth before she stopped herself. Clayton stood slowly. "There," he said. "Now it knows where it belongs." Hal touched the medal with 2 fingers, and for the first time, since Clayton had found the cup, the old man did not look like someone waiting to be moved along. He looked like someone trying to stand inside his own name again. The shuttle gave one weak click when Dennis turned the key, then nothing. Eldon did not curse. He only leaned closer, listening the way a doctor listens to a chest, one hand braced on the fender and the other wrapped around the loose battery cable. Clayton washed his face instead of the engine. A good mechanic always told the truth before his mouth did. "Battery is tired, but that is not the whole problem," Eldon said. "Belt is slipping, and this clamp is barely hanging on." Dennis rested his forehead against the steering wheel for 1 second, then sat back like a man who had already used up his excuses. "County gave me this van at 198,000 miles, he said, through the open window. "I asked for maintenance last month. They said after budget review." The dashboard clock read 11:03. Hal saw it. He tried not to, but his eyes moved there and stayed too long. Marla came closer, wiping her hands on the same towel, until there was nothing left to wipe. "Mr. Mercer," she said carefully, using his name for the first time since morning. "Is there someone at the cemetery waiting for you?" Hal touched the metal pin to his coat. The ribbon lay flat now, but the cloth still trembled with his breathing. "No," he said. "Not waiting." He looked past the shuttle, past the fair tents, past the road shimmering in the heat. "She has been waiting long enough." Nobody asked who she was. The answer was already in the way he said it. Clayton stepped away from the group and looked under the hood himself, not because he doubted Eldon, but because sometimes a problem needed more than one set of hands and less than one set of opinions. The engine bay smelled of hot rubber, old coolant, and dust baked into metal. He saw the cracked belt, the powdery corrosion around the terminal, the bracket that had worked itself loose after years of potholes and cheap repairs. It was not a disaster. It was worse than that. It was a small failure at the exact wrong hour. Royce called from the parts store at 11:08, his voice crackling through Clayton's old flip phone. They had one belt close enough to match, 2 clamps that would work, and no guarantee on either. Clayton looked at Eldon. Eldon nodded once. "Buy them," Clayton said, "and get a wire brush, if they have one." Hal shifted on the pallet, as if preparing to stand. "I can walk some of it." Clayton turned. Green Hollow was 9 miles away. The sun was high, the shoulder was loose gravel, and Hal had eaten his first real meal of the day 10 minutes ago. "No, sir," Clayton said. Hal's jaw tightened. "I did not ask you to carry me." "I know." Clayton kept his voice even. "That is why we are fixing the ride." The words settled between them without pity. That mattered to Hal. He looked down at his boots, cracked at the sides, and dusted pale from the lot, then gave a small nod that seemed to cost him more than anger would have. Marla stepped to the shuttle door and picked up the clipboard from the driver's seat. "There is a noon cemetery stop listed," she said. "Veterans Memorial Section." Dennis looked surprised. "He signed up 3 weeks ago," Marla added, reading the small line twice. "Harold Mercer. 1 passenger. No return requested until 2. Hal closed his eyes. Clayton saw that too. Not shame this time. Relief, maybe, that some piece of the world still had his name written down correctly. Across the road, the fair announcer called for the pie judging to begin in 15 minutes. Life kept moving in bright little circles. Here, behind the diner, 5 adults stood around an old shuttle and a paper cup, trying to keep one promise from breaking. Royce came back at 11:19 with dust on his jeans and a parts bag tied to the back of his bike with a bungee cord. He rolled in slow, not loud, not showing off, and stopped beside the shuttle with the kind of smooth control that made the old machine seem heavier than it was. The smell of warm rubber followed him. So did hope. Sycamore had one belt, he said, handing the bag to Eldon. Box was sun-faded, and the counter guy said it has been on the shelf since before his divorce, but the ribs match close enough. Eldon took it without smiling. Close enough is how half this country gets home. Clayton held the hood higher, while Eldon set to work, his hands moving, with a steady confidence that made the small crowd near the diner door grow quiet. Dennis passed tools as requested. Marla brought out a pitcher of ice water and paper cups, then placed them on the shuttle step instead of offering them around like charity. Hal watched from the pallet, the metal now pinned above his torn pocket, catching small flashes of daylight each time he breathed. The food had put color back into his face, but time kept taking it away again. The dashboard clock had become something nobody wanted to look at. 11:24, Hal finally spoke, not to anyone in particular. Margaret hated being late. Clayton glanced over. Hal was looking at the metal, but his eyes were somewhere far from the gravel lot. She would set the kitchen clock 7 minutes fast and still blame me for rushing her. Marla's face softened. Your wife? Hal nodded once. 41 years married. 38 with that medal in her top drawer. He touched the ribbon lightly. I put it there after I came home because I did not like what it made people ask me. She never pushed. Just dusted around it every Saturday like it was a family photograph. The fair noise thinned around the words. Even the fiddle across County Road 18 seemed farther away. Clayton did not ask about combat, medals, or old wounds. Men asked too much when they wanted a story, and too little when they wanted to help. He stayed quiet. Hal kept going because the silence was safe. Before she passed, she told me I had been letting a piece of metal scare me for too long. Said it belonged in daylight at least once, before I was gone too. His mouth moved like he wanted to smile, but grief stopped it halfway. Today would have been her birthday. Marla looked down at the gravel. Dennis wiped his hands on his county transit pants, though they were already dirty. Royce stood with one thumb hooked in his belt, staring at the shuttle tire like it had suddenly become important. Eldon kept working, but slower, as if the engine had become part of the conversation and deserved care. Clayton felt the weight of the old leather on his shoulders, the patch on his back, the road behind him, the road still ahead. Brotherhood meant rules. Not the loud kind. The kind that made a man stop when stopping was inconvenient. We will get you there, Clayton said. Hal looked at him. You do not have to promise that. Clayton tightened his grip on the hood. I know. Eldon pulled the cracked belt free at 11:31. It came off in his hands like something tired of holding together. The new one fought him. The bracket had shifted, the pulley sat a hair out of line, and the clamp Royce bought needed filing before it would bite clean. Small problems. Mean problems. The kind that stole minutes. Marla stepped back inside and returned with a nail file from her purse, still in pink plastic, and handed it to Eldon without a word. He looked at it, then at her. That will do. For the first time all morning, Hal gave a quiet laugh. It was not much. It was enough. By 11:34, the space behind Prairie Belle Diner had changed, without anyone announcing it. The old line between customer, worker, driver, biker, and man sleeping by the grease barrels had blurred into something more useful. Dennis held the flashlight. Marla kept the curious people inside moving, with coffee refills and a look that said the hallway was not a theater. Royce knelt beside Eldon, with a pocket knife, shaving the plastic edge of the new clamp until it fit the battery post clean. Clayton stood at the hood, one hand steady on the metal, watching every small piece find its place. No one was giving orders. They were just doing what needed doing. Hal sat on the pallet, with the paper cup in both hands, though the metal was no longer inside it. It was on his chest now, pinned above the torn pocket, rising and falling with each careful breath. The cup had become something else. Not a begging cup. Not trash. A witness. A young farm supply salesman stepped out of the diner, with a toothpick in his mouth, and started to lift his phone, maybe to record the scene, Maybe to send it to somebody who would call it heartwarming without knowing the first thing about it. Clayton saw the movement. He did not glare. He did not threaten. He only walked over and stood between the camera and Hal. "Not today," he said. 2 words. That was enough. The young man lowered the phone, embarrassed, and went back inside. Hal saw it happen. His eyes dropped to the gravel, but his grip on the cup loosened. Clayton returned to the shuttle, without making the moment larger than it was. Real protection did not always look like fighting. Sometimes it looked like blocking a lens. Eldon tightened the clamp at 11:37 and told Dennis to try the key. The first turn gave them a dry cough from the engine. The second gave them a shudder that rattled the hood. The third made the belt jump once, squeal, and settle. Eldon lifted one finger. "Hold it." Dennis held the key steady, his jaw tight. The engine caught, stumbled, then ran in a rough, uneven rhythm that sounded half alive and half offended at being asked to work on a Saturday. Royce laughed under his breath. Marla pressed both hands to the towel at her waist. Hal stood too quickly and swayed. Clayton was beside him before anyone else moved, not grabbing him, just offering an arm close enough to take. Hal took it after one stubborn second. Pride needed room to accept help. Clayton gave it room. The dashboard clock showed 11:41. Green Hollow Cemetery was 9 miles away, and the road there ran past the fairgrounds, over the low bridge, and along County 6, where loose gravel gathered in the curves. Dennis looked at Clayton. "She will run," he said, "but I would not push her hard." Clayton looked at the 3 bikes, then at the shuttle, then at Hal. "Then we do not push," he said. "We guide." Royce pulled his helmet on. Eldon wiped his hands on a red shop rag and tucked the nail file back into Marla's palm. It was scratched black at the edge now, ruined for anything pretty and perfect for what it had done. Marla looked at it and almost smiled. Hal stepped toward the shuttle door, one hand on Clayton's arm and the other touching the metal at his chest. Before climbing in, he turned back to the service door, the pallets, the grease barrels, and the strip of shade where the morning had nearly swallowed him. He looked at the paper cup in his hand. Then he carried it with him. The shuttle pulled out of the gravel lot at 11:43, slow enough that dust rolled behind it instead of rising in a cloud. Dennis kept both hands on the wheel, shoulders forward, listening to every rattle under the floorboards, as if the old vehicle might confess what hurt next. Hal sat in the second row by the window, the paper cup in his lap, and the metal pinned carefully to his coat, bright where the sun found it, through the glass. He did not wave at the diner. Not yet. Clayton rolled ahead first, his Harley easing, onto County Road 18, with a low, steady pulse that seemed to clear the way, without asking for attention. Royce rode behind the shuttle on the left, Eldon on the right. Their bikes staggered wide enough to give Dennis room, and close enough to warn drivers that the white county van mattered today. They did not race. They escorted. The fair slipped away behind them. Tents, flags, pie judges, a tractor display. Marla standing near the service door, with one hand raised halfway, and the ruined nail file still in the other. The road opened into wheat fields, green and low under the spring light, with fence posts leaning west, as if the wind had been teaching them for years. Hal watched the fields pass. Every mile marker seemed to pull something loose in him. At mile 3, Dennis eased the shuttle over a patch of rough asphalt, and the belt squealed once under the hood. Everyone heard it. Eldon lifted one gloved hand and pointed to the shoulder, then gave a small circle with his finger. "Slow." Dennis nodded without looking away from the road. Clayton saw the signal in his mirror and dropped his speed to 35 miles per hour. A delivery truck came up behind Royce too fast, its driver impatient, front grille filling the lane. Royce did not make a scene. He moved his bike slightly left, tapped his brake twice, and pointed to the open stretch ahead, where passing was safe. The truck went around, wide and clean, and Royce settled back into position like nothing had happened. That was the kind of strength people rarely noticed. Hal noticed. "They do this for people often?" he asked. Dennis glanced at him in the mirror. "Those men." He considered the answer. "More often than they talk about." Hal looked back at Clayton, who rode ahead, with his shoulders square, leather vest shifting in the wind, sunlight flashing across the gas tank in brief hard sparks. The sound of the V-twins came, through the shuttle walls, not loud enough to frighten, just deep enough to be felt in the ribs. It reminded Hal of distant engines on base, of convoys leaving before dawn, of men who did not say they were scared because the job still needed doing. He looked down at the paper cup. The rim was bent from being carried all morning. A brown coffee stain marked one side. Inside, a small flake of ribbon thread still clung to the bottom, where the metal had rested. Margaret would have laughed at this, he said. Dennis smiled faintly. At the motorcycles? Hal shook his head. Emmy needing an escort to keep one promise. The low bridge appeared at 11:51, limestone sides pale against a shallow creek. Gravel lay thick on the far curve. Clayton slowed first and pointed down with 2 fingers. Dennis followed the line Clayton gave him. Gentle on the wheel, gentle on the brake. The shuttle crossed without slipping. On the other side, Green Hollow Cemetery came into view beyond a line of cottonwoods, its small white chapel roof shining through the leaves. Hal stopped breathing for a second. Then he took one full breath, deeper than before. Clayton raised his left hand, not high, just enough for the men behind him to see. The Brotherhood tightened around the shuttle for the final half-mile. No horn, no shouting, only engines, sunlight, and an old man holding a paper cup like it had carried him farther than 9 miles. The shuttle reached the cemetery gate at 11:56, moving so slowly that the tires barely whispered over the gravel. Green Hollow Cemetery sat on a gentle rise beyond the cottonwoods, with rows of white stones, trimmed grass, and a small flag snapping beside the chapel. Dennis parked near the veterans section and shut the engine off, with both hands still on the wheel, as if he feared the van might disappear if he let go too soon. It had made it. Hal sat still for a moment. The paper cup rested in his lap, bent and stained, and the metal on his coat caught one clean blade of sunlight through the window. Clayton stepped off his bike first, then Royce and Eldon, all 3 men removing their gloves without speaking. They stayed back when Hal came down the shuttle steps. Dennis offered an arm. Hal accepted it. That was enough. The grave was 27 steps from the lane, beneath a young maple tree, with leaves just beginning to open. The stone read Margaret Ellen Mercer, beloved wife, steady heart. Hal stopped in front of it, and the wind moved softly through the flags planted along the row. For several seconds, he did not kneel. He only stood there, breathing as if he had carried the whole 9 miles in his chest. Then he took the paper cup in one hand and unclipped the metal with the other. His fingers shook, but he did not drop it. He placed the metal at the base of the headstone, right beside a small bunch of yellow daisies someone had left days before. "I brought it, Maggie," he said. No one moved. Clayton stood more than 20 steps away, close enough to catch Hal, if he stumbled, far enough to let the promise belong to him. That was the line. That was respect. After a while, Hal picked the metal back up and pinned it to his coat again. He did not look healed. Real life did not work that fast. But when he turned around, he looked less erased. Back at Prairie Belle Diner, Marla had already changed the sign in the front window. The words "Free Coffee for Veterans" until noon were still there, but beneath them she had taped a new line in black marker. "If you are waiting on a ride, come inside." No explanation. No speech. Just a door opened wider than it had been that morning. The Brotherhood did not solve every part of Hal Mercer's life before sunset. They paid for a clean motel room on Route 6 for 7 nights, fixed the broken latch on his old document box, and drove him Monday morning to the county veterans office with his identification papers in a folder Royce bought from the dollar store. Dennis filed a repair request for the shuttle with photographs of the cracked belt and corroded clamp. Marla kept a staff breakfast wrapped and ready every Saturday, not as charity, but as a habit of paying attention. Clayton kept the paper cup on the passenger shelf at the Brotherhood garage for 1 week, until Hal asked for it back. He said it looked like nothing to most people. That was why he wanted to keep it. Some things do not become sacred because they are beautiful. They become sacred because someone finally noticed what they were carrying. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.